The cold seeped into Alara Vance's bones, a constant companion in the dim stone cell. Each breath she took scraped against the dry air, a silent protest against the fate awaiting her. Her long, dark brown hair, once a cascade of carefully braided strands, hung loose and tangled around her shoulders, framing a face streaked with the tracks of countless tears. Yet, in the depths of her striking gray eyes, a flicker of something unyielding remained, a stubborn defiance that refused to be extinguished completely, even now. She pressed her hands against the rough stone wall, its chill a stark reminder of her confinement within the obsidian keep. The heavy oak door creaked open, sending a shiver through her. Two burly alpha guards filled the doorway, their faces impassive. Their presence spoke volumes, a silent summons that twisted the knot of dread in her stomach tighter. This was it, the final walk. Her heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of terror and injustice. She knew her innocence, a truth as sharp and cold as the stone beneath her bare feet. But in the eyes of the pack, in the halls of their rigid law, her truth held no weight. They had already judged. A guard roughly gripped her arm, pulling her forward. The touch sent an electric jolt of fear through her arm, but she did not flinch. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Her body moved mechanically, her legs stiff from days of sitting on the unforgiving floor. The corridor was a tunnel of gray, lit by flickering torchlight that cast dancing shadows, making the ancient stones seem to writhe. The air tasted of damp earth and the faint, musky scent of wolf fur, a smell that once brought comfort but now only evoked a sense of overwhelming power and judgment. She imagined Alaric, her deceased husband, Lord Alaric Blackwood, watching her from some dark corner, a sneer on his lips. His memory was a poison that still burned, even in his absence. He had been a cruel man, his words sharper than any blade, his presence a suffocating shadow. The thought of him made her stomach churn, a sickening mix of grief for what might have been and bitter relief that his tyranny was over. But that relief had come at an unbearable cost, her freedom, her reputation, and now her life. The rhythmic thump of her own feet echoed in the silence, each step carrying her closer to the Alpha Council. She tried to focus on anything else, the faint glint of moonlight through a high window, the way the torch smoke coiled towards the ceiling. Her breath hitched in her throat, a desperate prayer forming on her lips, unspoken, unheard. Could there be a mistake? Could someone, anyone, see past the accusations, past the prejudgment? Her mind screamed against the unfairness, the brutal finality of it all. The guards steered her through a larger archway into a vast chamber where the very air seemed to thicken with authority. The Alpha Council sat arranged in a semicircle, their faces grave and unyielding. The high ceiling soared above, lost in shadows, and the banners of ancient pack leaders hung limply, their woven symbols mute witnesses to centuries of tradition and law. A chill stronger than any she had felt in her cell permeated the room, an emotional coldness that seemed to steal the warmth from her very soul. At the center of the council, on a raised dais, sat Caleb Thorne, the Alpha King. His presence was a palpable force, a raw, untamed power that filled the room. His hair, the color of midnight, framed a face set in stone, and his amber eyes, usually burning with an inner fire, were now a piercing, unreadable gold. He was a mountain of a man, broad-shouldered and imposing, and yet there was a stillness about him, a quiet intensity that drew her gaze, even in her terror. He looked stern, his jaw clenched, and his gaze, when it met hers for a fleeting second, held a flicker she could not decipher. Alara's heart pounded, a frantic bird trapped in her chest. She stood before them, a lone figure in a sea of judgment, her hands bound at her wrists. The scent of fear, her own, was sharp in her nostrils, mingled with the earthy scent of the council members, the deep, primal smell of their wolf forms barely contained. She felt their eyes on her, a collective weight pressing down, crushing the last vestiges of hope. Caleb Thorne shifted slightly, his powerful frame radiating a silent authority that commanded absolute attention. He cleared his throat, the sound resonating through the silent chamber, making the small hairs on Alara's arms stand on end. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and resonant, each word carefully measured. carrying the weight of ancient law. Alara Vance, he began, his gaze unwavering. You stand accused of a crime most heinous in the eyes of our pack, and indeed, in the eyes of all our kind. His words were not a question, but a pronouncement, a statement of fact already decided. The murder of your mate, Lord Alaric Blackwood. Alara's breath caught. She wanted to scream, to protest her innocence, to shatter the suffocating silence with her truth. But her throat felt constricted, her voice a fragile whisper against the roar of her despair. Tears welled in her eyes again, hot and stinging, blurring the stern faces of the council members. She swallowed hard, trying to reclaim some shred of composure. The evidence presented to this council, Caleb continued, his voice devoid of emotion, points undeniably to your culpability. He paused, his eyes sweeping across the council, then back to Alara. Our pack law is clear, etched in stone by our ancestors. The taking of a mate's life is an unforgivable offense, a betrayal of the sacred bond, deserving of the highest penalty. Alara's mind reeled. Undeniable culpability. It was a lie. A cruel, vicious lie. She thought of the night Alaric died, the chaos, the fear, the desperate struggle. She had tried to save him, to stop the madness that consumed their home. But who would believe her? Who would believe the words of a woman accused of such a monstrous act, especially when her accusers were those who had always sought to diminish her? Caleb Thorne watched Alara, his expression stern, a mask of the Alpha King fulfilling his duty. Yet, beneath the rigid facade, a flicker of unease stirred within him. He saw her tears, the raw pain in her eyes, but also that stubborn spark of defiance. It was not the look of a cowering killer, but something more complex, more tormented. He had presided over countless judgments, condemned many to exile or worse, but this felt different. The weight of this particular condemnation pressed heavily on his chest, a cold, unfamiliar sensation. He grappled with his duty, the immutable laws of their people demanding absolute adherence. The pack needed justice. The pack needed order. The pack needed to see that even the highest among them, the mate of a lord, was not above the law. But something about Alara Vance, even in her despair, resonated with a quiet strength that troubled him. It was a fleeting thought, a whisper against the thunder of his responsibilities, and he pushed it down, burying it deep. Therefore, Caleb's voice rang out, firm and unwavering, though a subtle tightness in his jaw betrayed the inner conflict. By the authority vested in me as Alpha King, and with the full consent of this Alpha Council, we formally announce your condemnation to death. The words struck Alara like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. The room swam around her, the faces of the council blurring into indistinct shapes. Her ears buzzed, a deafening roar that drowned out the world. Death. The word echoed in her mind, cold and absolute. She was 26 years old, and her life, filled with so much unspoken sorrow and unfulfilled dreams, was about to end. A choked sob escaped her, a sound of profound pain and betrayal. She lifted her head, her eyes swimming with tears, locking onto Caleb Thorne's for a moment. What did she see there? A flicker of pity? A shadow of regret? Or just the cold, hard resolve of a king executing his duty? She could not tell. Her vision blurred again, but she held his gaze, a silent accusation, a desperate plea for understanding that she could not voice. Caleb felt the weight of her gaze, a sharp, unexpected pang in his chest. He saw the pure agony there, the profound sense of injustice. His wolf stirred within him, a low growl of discomfort, an instinct he could not explain. He hardened his gaze, forcing back the intrusion of doubt. His duty was paramount. He was the Alpha. His people depended on his unwavering judgment. The execution, Caleb declared, his voice regaining its full authority, will take place immediately in the executioner's square. The finality of his words sealed her fate. The guards moved forward instantly, their movements swift and practiced. They took her arms, pulling her away from the council, away from the flickering torchlight, and towards a different, darker passage. The rough stone scraped against her skin, but she barely registered it. Her body felt numb, her mind a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. As they led her through the labyrinthine corridors of the keep, the air grew colder, the sounds of the outside world slowly filtering in. A low murmur, then distinct voices, growing louder, more agitated. The scent of the crowd, a mix of expectation and hostility, began to assault her senses. They were waiting for her. They had come to watch her die. Her heart beat a furious, desperate rhythm against her ribs, a drum of dread that threatened to consume her. Each step was an agony, a march towards an undeserved end. The jeers of the crowd began to reach her ears, raw and cruel, echoing around her, pressing in from all sides. They condemned her, these strangers, these members of her own pack, for a crime she did not commit. Elara Vance was roughly escorted towards the execution square, her heart a drum of dread against her ribs, the jeers of the crowd echoing around her. The coarse hands of the guards propelled Elara forward, each step a further descent into a nightmare she could not escape. The cobbled path scraped at her bare feet, a brutal reminder of her impending fate. A chill wind, sharp and unforgiving, whipped strands of dark hair across her face, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and the metallic tang of fear. It also carried the sound of the throng, a monstrous, restless hum that swelled and receded like an angry tide. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Each beat echoed the relentless rhythm of the drums that had begun to throb, slow and heavy, signaling the final march. She tightened her jaw, focusing on the uneven stones beneath her, refusing to meet the hateful glares of the villagers pressed in close. Their whispers slithered past her ears, venomous and cruel, condemning her with every breath. They saw a monster, a mate killer, not a woman whose spirit had been slowly crushed, piece by agonizing piece. The raised platform, stark and menacing, loomed ahead like a gallows. Its dark wood, stained with age and countless judgments, seemed to pull at her, an inescapable magnet. A wave of nausea washed over Elara, her stomach clenching into a knot. She swallowed hard, tasting bile, forcing herself to breathe despite the constriction in her chest. She would not falter. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. Just as she neared the steps, a memory, cold and sharp as a winter blade, pierced through the haze of her despair. It was the night Alaric had shattered her mother's favorite porcelain vase, a delicate piece she had carried with her since childhood. He had done it without a word, his dark eyes fixed on hers, a chilling smile playing on his lips. His hand, usually so firm and demanding, had reached out, not to comfort, but to slowly, deliberately push the vase from the mantelpiece. The crash had echoed in the quiet room, a sound that tore through her more than any shout. "That," he had whispered, his voice dangerously soft, "is what happens to things you hold dear, Elara, when you displease me." His grip on her arm had been bruising, a possessive vice leaving marks she could feel for days. "You belong to me, and everything you cherish is mine to break." He had then pulled her into a mocking embrace, his breath hot against her ear, the sickening scent of his wolf a suffocating blanket. The memory of his cold, calculated cruelty, far more terrifying than any physical blow, still made her skin crawl. It was a constant reminder of the cage he had built around her, the way he had delighted in chipping away at her soul. Her vision blurred for a moment, but she shook her head, pushing the image away. She had survived him, in a way. Now she faced a different kind of ending. The drums grew louder, the sound reverberating through her very bones. The air grew heavier, thick with anticipation. The guards shoved her roughly up the 3 wooden steps. She stumbled, catching herself before she fell, her hands already bound tightly at her wrists, the coarse rope biting into her skin. From a raised dais overlooking the square, Alpha King Caleb Thorne watched. His amber eyes, usually burning with an inner fire, were shadowed, his expression grim. He stood tall, his broad shoulders squared, a figure of imposing authority. The low growl of his wolf, a deep rumble beneath his skin, was not one of rage, but of a profound, unsettling disquiet. He had seen countless judgments carried out, presided over many executions, but this one felt different. There was a raw, defiant vulnerability in the woman before him, even as she walked towards her death. Caleb's gaze did not waver from Elara. He noted the way her chin was held high, the proud tilt of her head, even in such abject despair. He saw the faint tremor in her hands, the tension in her slender frame, but also an undeniable strength. He was the Alpha, bound by tradition and law to uphold the justice of his pack. The evidence against Alara Temedarum had been compelling, the testimonies damning. She had been found with the murder weapon, alone with Alaric's lifeless body. The pack demanded retribution, yet something within him gnawed, a tiny, insistent doubt that he could not silence. He thought of Alaric, a man he had known since childhood, a lord of their pack. Alaric had been charismatic, well-respected, a loyal subject. Yet there had always been a subtle undercurrent to him, a predatory gleam in his dark eyes that Caleb had never quite trusted. He pushed the thought aside. His duty was clear. He had sworn an oath to his people. His personal feelings, his fleeting instincts, could not sway the course of justice. The heavy weight of his alpha responsibilities pressed down on him, a crushing burden that had always been his solitary companion. He yearned for a mate, a Luna to share the immense responsibilities of leadership, but the goddess had not blessed him. He had learned to suppress such desires, to rule with a stoic hand and an unyielding will. This execution, though necessary, tasted bitter in his mouth. He watched as Alara reached the center of the platform. The executioner, a hulking figure in a dark hood, stood ready, his axe gleaming dully in the fading light of the afternoon sun. The crowd fell silent, their collective breath held, waiting. A sudden sharp gust of wind swept through the square, rustling the banners that hung from the keep's walls. And for a fleeting moment, Alara's long, dark brown hair billowed around her, obscuring her face. Alara stood on the raised platform, her hands bound, as the executioner's polished axe gleamed dully in the fading light, poised to strike. The chilling silence that descended upon the executioner's square felt heavier than the granite walls of the obsidian keep itself. A thick, expectant hush had fallen, swallowing the restless murmurs of the assembled pack. Hundreds of eyes, like burning embers in the fading light, were fixed upon Alara. The Alpha Guard formed a rigid, impenetrable perimeter around the raised platform, their silver-tipped spears glinting dully as the last rays of the sun bled from the sky. The air, already thin with anticipation, now pressed down, making each breath a conscious effort. Alara could taste the dust in her mouth, the metallic tang of her own fear, a bitter mixture on her tongue. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped within a cage, its frantic rhythm echoing the last moments of her life. She looked out at the sea of faces, a blur of judgment and morbid curiosity. There was no solace to be found there, no flicker of understanding. Only the stark reality of her fate etched onto every hard line, every narrowed eye. A cold dread, sharper than any blade, pierced through the numbness that had settled over her since her condemnation. This was it, the final act. Her fingers, bound tightly at her wrists, felt cold, almost lifeless. She could feel the rough bite of the ropes against her skin, a constant reminder of her helplessness. A single tear, cold and unwelcome, tracked a path down her cheek, a betrayal of the stoic resolve she had desperately tried to maintain. Caleb Thorne, Alpha King, felt the weight of every gaze in the square, an oppressive mantle upon his broad shoulders. He stood at the edge of the platform, his boots heavy on the cold, cobbled stone. Each step he took towards Alara was a deliberate, measured act, a movement dictated by centuries of pack law and tradition. His amber eyes, usually burning with an inner fire, were now shadowed, reflecting the grim task ahead. He had presided over countless judgments, witnessed the enforcement of justice, but this felt different. A tremor of unease, a faint discord resonated within him, a subtle protest from his wolf, an instinct he could not quite articulate. The scent of damp stone and a faint, acrid smell of fear clung to the air, mingling with the earthy scent of the forest carried on the evening breeze. Caleb took a deep breath, trying to steady the unbidden tremor in his hand. He was the law, the ultimate arbiter, and his duty was absolute. Yet, as his gaze met Alara's, he saw not the monstrous mate-killer described by the accusers, but a woman. Her gray eyes, though brimming with unshed tears, held a fierce, unyielding defiance. A defiance that spoke of a spirit unbroken, even in the face of annihilation. He saw not guilt, but a profound, almost ancient sorrow. He reached the edge of the platform, the wood creaking softly beneath his weight. The executioner, a hulking figure masked in dark leather, stood to one side, axe at rest, a silent, grim sentinel. The blade gleamed wickedly, catching the last of the light, a promise of swift, brutal finality. Caleb's eyes swept over Alara once more, a final, traditional inspection of the condemned. Her slender frame seemed fragile against the backdrop of the towering keep, yet a strange resilience emanated from her, a quiet strength that belied her bound hands and imminent doom. He noticed the long, dark brown hair, carefully braided and coiled at the nape of her neck, a stark contrast to the starkness of her situation. It seemed a small, almost tender detail in such a brutal setting. Unbind her hair. Caleb's voice was deep, resonant, cutting through the heavy silence like a honed blade. The words were not a request, but a command. The assembled pack stirred, a ripple of quiet surprise passing through them. It was not customary for the condemned's hair to be unbound. The guards exchanged fleeting glances, but no one questioned the Alpha King. His word was law. Alara felt a sudden prickle of confusion at the command. Why now? Why this small, seemingly insignificant gesture? It mattered little. Soon none of it would matter. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, picturing the familiar strands being released, the weight of it falling free. It was one last taste of a normal life, perhaps, before the final darkness claimed her. A guard, his face impassive, stepped forward. His movements were swift, practiced. He reached for the intricate braid, his rough fingers carefully undoing the woven strands. Caleb watched, his gaze unwavering. He noticed the slight tremble in Alara's shoulders as the guard's hands worked, a raw vulnerability exposed. Her head bowed slightly as the pins were removed, the carefully constructed coil unraveling. The long, dark brown hair cascaded down her back, a rich, flowing curtain against her pale skin. It was a simple act, yet it felt heavy with unspoken meaning. Her hair, once neatly contained, now hung wild and free, a symbol of something elemental, untamed even in defeat. He found himself drawn to it, to the stark contrast of her dark hair against her exposed neck. A strange urge, a primal instinct he could not explain, tugged at him. He needed to see her clearly, to understand the woman behind the accusations, the face upon which the final judgment would fall. He had to perform this duty, but some part of him rebelled against the cold, impersonal nature of it. The wind picked up, a mournful sigh through the chains of the keep, rustling Alara's newly freed hair. A shiver traced its way down her spine, a combination of the chill and the ever-present dread. The guard stepped back, having completed his task. Alara's hair now lay loose, a dark cloud around her, framing her face. She raised her head slowly, her eyes still defiant, locking with Caleb's once more. A silent conversation passed between them, a fleeting moment of intense, raw connection that transcended the roles they played. He was the executioner, she the condemned. Yet in that brief, shared glance, there was something more. A question in her eyes, a flicker of something unreadable in his. Caleb took another step forward, his hand raising slowly, almost involuntarily. He felt a magnetic pull towards her, a force he could not comprehend. His fingers brushed against the soft, cool strands of her hair. He intended only to push a few wayward locks from her face, to clear her features for his final, solemn pronouncement. It was a gesture born of an unexpected surge of humanity, a desire to afford her some dignity in her last moments. The crowd held its breath, utterly silent, watching the Alpha King's every move. His fingertips grazed her skin, a brief, startling contact. Her hair felt soft, like spun silk beneath his touch. He gently swept it aside, intending to clear the area around her neck, to prepare for what was to come. As his hand moved, brushing the dark strands away from the delicate curve of her nape, a faint, intricate pattern beneath her hairline caught his eye. It was small, almost hidden, a swirling design that seemed to pulse with a soft, ethereal glow in the dimming light. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot through Caleb's entire being, igniting every nerve ending, every cell. It was not pain, but a shock of profound recognition, an ancient memory awakening within his very bones. His breath hitched in his throat, caught, unable to escape. The world seemed to tilt, the sounds of the square receding into a distant, muffled hum. His fingers froze, hovering over the mark, a strange, undeniable truth unfolding before his very eyes. This was not just a mark, it was something far older, far more sacred. An inexplicable recognition, profound and absolute, flooded his mind, drowning out all reason, all duty, all law. Caleb's fingertips brushed against the smooth skin at the nape of her neck, tracing the delicate curve of her spine. His breath hitched in his throat, a sudden sharp intake of air that felt alien in his own chest. There, just beneath the silken strands of her unbound hair, lay an intricate pattern. It was a swirling design, like ancient script woven with starlight and shadow, barely visible against her pale skin. A shock, cold and then searing, shot through his entire being. It was not a tattoo, it was not a scar, it was the mark. His fingers locked around her neck, not in aggression, but in an involuntary grip of absolute disbelief. The world around him, the murmuring crowd, the cold stone, the very air seemed to vanish. He saw only the mark, and it burned into his mind, igniting something deep within him, something he had never truly understood. An ancient recognition, older than memory, older than his own pack, surged through his veins. This was the fated mate mark, and it was hers. It was hers, and she was here, condemned to die by his own hand. A profound shock washed over him, stealing his voice, paralyzing his limbs. His alpha senses, usually so sharp and commanding, were overwhelmed by a torrent of raw, untamed instinct. His wolf, usually a disciplined presence within him, now roared with the fury of 1,000 storms. It was not a quiet growl, but an earthquake inside his skull, a primal scream of possession and desperate protection. The bond ignited, not as a gentle flicker, but as a supernova exploding in the core of his soul. He felt an instantaneous, undeniable pull, a magnetic force connecting his very essence to hers. Her scent, which had been faint and tinged with fear moments ago, now bloomed into something intoxicating, something undeniably right. It spoke of damp earth after a summer rain, of wild honeysuckle under a moonlit sky, of everything he had unknowingly yearned for his entire life. The scent coiled around him, claiming him, demanding his allegiance. It was the scent of his future, his other half, his destiny. Alara felt the sudden tension in his hand, a trembling she did not understand. His amber eyes, which had held a detached authority, now burned with an intensity that pierced her very soul. They were no longer the eyes of the Alpha King, but something wilder, untamed, almost desperate. A strange warmth spread from the point where his fingers touched her neck, a sensation both terrifying and inexplicably comforting. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She tried to breathe, but the air felt thick, heavy with an unspoken truth. The executioner, a hulking figure named Thomas, shifted his weight on the platform, the heavy axe handle creaking in his calloused hands. His eyes darted nervously between the king and the condemned woman. The crowd, a sea of faces below, grew increasingly restless. Their murmurs intensified, a low hum of impatience and anticipation. They had come for a spectacle, for justice, for the swift finality of pack law. They did not understand this delay, this strange, silent tableau unfolding before them. Caleb's mind raced, a chaotic storm of conflicting thoughts and emotions. This cannot be. He tried to reason, to cling to the cold logic of his position, his duty, his pack's ancient laws. Pack law dictated the immediate execution of a mate killer. It was absolute, unwavering. And yet, this mark, this undeniable sacred mark, superseded all laws, all traditions, all reason. It was the decree of the moon goddess herself, etched onto their very souls. His wolf snarled, a guttural sound that vibrated through his bones. Mine. The word echoed, a demand, an absolute truth that dwarfed every other thought. He was Alpha King, protector of his pack, enforcer of their laws. But he was also a wolf, a creature of instinct, bound by a connection far more primal than any human decree. To let her die would be to tear out his own heart, to sever his soul from its anchor. The thought brought a wave of nausea, a physical ache that permeated his entire being. He saw her then, truly saw Alara Vance, not as the alleged killer, not as the condemned, but as his fated. Her striking gray eyes, wide with confusion and a lingering despair, held a depth he had missed before. Her slender build, the way her shoulders curved, the vulnerability in her posture. Every detail suddenly magnified, suddenly important, suddenly his. A fierce, protective urge, unlike anything he had ever known, flared within him. He wanted to shield her from the world, to wrap her in his strength, to erase the fear from her gaze. The air thrummed with a nervous energy, the unspoken questions of the crowd growing louder. A few voices began to call out, impatient. "Alpha King, the hour grows late," another shouted. "Let justice be served." The jeers and whispers, once directed at Alara, now turned into a low, questioning growl directed at Caleb's inexplicable delay. The weight of their expectations pressed down on him, a physical burden on his broad shoulders. His hand, still on her neck, felt a faint tremor ripple through Alara. Her eyes darted upwards, meeting his. There was no defiance now, only raw vulnerability, mixed with a nascent, bewildered hope. She did not understand what was happening, but she felt the shift, the profound change in the man who held her fate in his hands. A tear, silent and shimmering, traced a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of despair, but of something else. Something born of the confusing intensity of his gaze. Caleb felt that tear, saw it, and something within him shattered. How could he have let it come to this? How could he have stood by, prepared to execute his own fated? The injustice of it, the cruel irony twisted in his gut. His honor, his pride, his very identity as Alpha suddenly felt small and insignificant against the monumental truth of the bond. His wolf howled internally, a mournful, furious sound that demanded action. He tasted the coppery tang of blood in his mouth, a result of clenching his jaw so tightly. His knuckles were white where he gripped Alara's neck, though he eased the pressure slightly, an unconscious gesture of protection. The cold, damp stone of the platform seemed to press against his boots, grounding him, even as his world spun wildly off its axis. He could feel the eyes of every single pack member in him, their collective will urging him forward, demanding the preordained outcome. But the fated mark pulsating faintly beneath his touch was an unyielding command. It was not a suggestion. It was an absolute law, written by the universe itself. His entire life, he had sought a mate, a Luna to stand by his side, to complete him and strengthen their pack. He had resigned himself to a lonely reign, believing his destiny was one of singular leadership. Now here she was, on an execution platform, accused of murder and bearing the sacred sign. The irony was devastating. He saw the executioner, Thomas, meet his gaze, a silent question in his hardened eyes. Thomas was ready. The axe was poised. One word from Caleb, and it would all be over. But that word would also be the end of Caleb, the true end of his soul, even if his body lived on. He would be an alpha broken, a wolf without his mate, a shadow of the leader he was meant to be. The thought was a physical blow, worse than any battle wound. A faint tremor ran through his own body, a shiver that had nothing to do with the cool autumn air. It was the shock of recognition, the pain of conflict, the overwhelming surge of his awakened wolf. Every fiber of his being screamed to protect her, to claim her, to tear down anyone who dared to threaten her. The alpha in him, the leader who always put his pack first, found himself in an impossible, agonizing paradox. His pack's law demanded her death, but his soul demanded her life. His gaze swept over the sea of faces, stern and unyielding. He could see their confusion, their impatience, their unwavering belief in his judgment. For years he had been their rock, their unwavering leader. Now in this single pivotal moment, he had to shatter every expectation, every ingrained belief. He had to defy centuries of tradition, not for political gain, but for the most primal, undeniable truth. The scent of her, pure and intoxicating, filled his lungs with every ragged breath. It was a lifeline, a burning ember in the frozen wasteland of his mind. He could not, would not, allow this injustice to stand. He felt the tremor of his own hands, the thundering of his own heart. a drum beat matching the frenzied rhythm of his wolf. The choice, though impossible, was already made. His duty to the goddess, to his own soul, superseded his duty to tradition. His eyes, now a molten gold, locked onto Alara's. She flinched slightly, but did not look away. He could see the questions in their gray depths, the confusion, the fear, and a tiny, almost imperceptible spark of hope. He would answer those questions. He would explain. But first he had to stop this madness. He had to reclaim her from the jaws of death, from the very fate he had imposed upon her. A sound ripped from his throat, a deep, guttural growl that was half human, half wolf. It was not a growl of anger, but of absolute primal force, of a will that would not be denied. It vibrated through the entire square, cutting through the murmurs, silencing every single voice. The sound echoed off the ancient stone walls of the obsidian keep, a declaration that shook the very foundations of their world. Every head snapped towards him, every eye wide with shock and sudden fear. His voice, when it came, was not the measured, authoritative tone of the Alpha King they knew. It was raw, powerful, and laced with the undeniable claim of his wolf, a force that brooked no argument, no dissent. With a primal growl that silences the entire square, Caleb Thorne barks, "Halt the execution! She is my fated." The primal growl had ripped through the very air, shattering the tense silence. It was not a human sound, but something ancient and untamed, resonating deep in the chests of every werewolf present. The word fated hung in the sudden, breathless void, a declaration that defied all understanding. Alara felt it vibrate through the very soles of her feet, up her spine, and into her skull. Her eyes, wide with confusion and a terror that had momentarily eclipsed her impending death, darted towards Caleb. He stood before her, his chest heaving, amber eyes now blazing with a fierce, possessive fire she had never witnessed. A collective gasp rippled through the gathered pack members. Then a low, guttural murmur began to spread, like a sickness through the crowd. It started as whispers of disbelief, then grew into a roar of outrage. "What is he saying?" someone yelled from the back. "The Alpha has lost his mind," another voice shrieked, laced with fear. Alara could feel the sudden shift in the atmosphere, the air growing thick with indignation and a dangerous uncertainty. The guards on the platform, previously rigid and stoic, now exchanged bewildered glances, their grip on their weapons faltering slightly. They looked to Caleb, then to Alara, then back to their Alpha, their faces a mixture of confusion and open rebellion. Caleb's gaze was fixed on Alara, searing into her, as if he alone existed in this chaotic tableau. He took a step closer, his powerful frame looming over her. The executioner, a hulking brute with a scarred face, stood frozen, the heavy axe still poised above Alara's neck. A bead of sweat traced the path down his temple, perhaps from the sudden exertion, or perhaps from the overwhelming tension. He had never been given such a command, never seen such a moment unfold. His hands, calloused and strong, trembled almost imperceptibly. "Silence!" Caleb Thorne's voice boomed, carrying across the square. It was deeper, more resonant than before, infused with the raw power of his Alpha command. The sound was like a physical blow, silencing the rising din of the crowd instantly. A few brave souls tried to shout again, but their voices caught in their throats, choked by the sheer force of his will. The sheer weight of his authority pressed down on every single person, forcing them into submission, if only for a moment. Alara felt her own breath catch, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was still bound, still on the platform of her execution, but suddenly, irrevocably, everything had changed. She felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. Was this some cruel trick? A prolonged torture before the final blow? Her mind, already frayed from days of despair, struggled to comprehend the words. Fated. Mate. These were sacred concepts, ancient and rare, almost mythical in their rarity. She knew their meaning, of course, but to hear them directed at her, from the Alpha King who was moments from ordering her death, was simply unthinkable. A tremor ran through her slender frame. The cold stone beneath her bare feet suddenly felt distant, and the smell of the damp earth and the fear of the crowd seemed to recede. Caleb ignored the lingering whispers, the lingering shock on the faces of his pack. His eyes, though still burning with primal fire, held a sharp, calculating glint. He knew the uproar his declaration would cause. He knew the challenge it presented to his authority, to the very laws he upheld. But the mark, the deep, ingrained certainty that had flooded his being when his fingers grazed her skin, was undeniable. His wolf, usually a disciplined force within him, was now a roaring tempest, demanding, claiming, "This woman," Caleb announced, his voice still thundering, "is under my personal protection." He stepped fully in front of Alara, turning his back slightly to the agitated crowd. His broad shoulders, usually a symbol of leadership, now became a literal shield. He placed his left hand firmly on her upper arm, a possessive gesture that was both startling and protective. Alara flinched at the sudden, unexpected contact, a spark igniting where his skin met hers, a jolt that went through her like lightning. She hadn't been touched with anything but contempt or restraint in weeks. The guards surrounding the platform shifted nervously, their spears held loosely. They were torn between their duty to the pack laws and their ingrained obedience to their alpha. Their faces betrayed their inner turmoil, their brows furrowed with confusion. One of them, a burly wolf named Thomas, began to take a hesitant step forward, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "Alpha King," he began, his voice rough with uncertainty. "The law states—" Caleb cut him off with a single sharp glare. His gaze was pure alpha, cold and unyielding, promising swift and severe repercussions for any defiance. Thomas stopped dead in his tracks, his challenge wilting under the weight of Caleb's stare. The Alpha King's wolf was too close to the surface, too dominant for any subordinate to truly defy him now. The air crackled with unspoken threats. "Take her, Gintanam," Caleb commanded, his voice now lower but no less absolute, addressing the two closest guards. "Take her to the royal chambers. Ensure her comfort. Provide her with clothes, food, and guards. Two at her door, constantly. No one enters without my express permission." His grip tightened on Alara's arm for a fraction of a second, a silent reassurance, or perhaps a possessive claim. Alara's breath hitched in her throat. Royal chambers, not a dungeon, not a cell, but the very heart of the keep she was meant to be executed in. The guards hesitated for another moment, their minds racing, trying to reconcile this impossible directive with everything they knew. But the Alpha's command was absolute. They had seen the burning intensity in his eyes, felt the tremor of his power. To disobey now would be to challenge the very core of their pack's order. They lowered their weapons slightly, a gesture of submission, and approached Alara with newfound caution. Alara felt the rough hands of the guards on her arms, not in the cruel binding way they had before, but with a strange, almost respectful deference. Her wrists were still bound, but the ropes now felt lighter, almost symbolic. She was no longer a condemned criminal, but what? A prisoner of the Alpha King's inexplicable will? A fated mate? The words felt foreign and terrifying. She still couldn't quite believe it. Her mind reeled with the sudden shift, unable to process the enormity of it. The executioner, still holding his arm, finally lowered it, the heavy metal thudding softly against the wooden platform. His face was a mask of bewilderment. His duty abruptly halted. His purpose dissolved into chaos. He looked almost lost, a tool without a function. Caleb watched as the guards began to untie Alara's wrists. He didn't take his eyes off her, not for a moment. He saw the faint purple marks where the ropes had dug into her skin, the way her shoulders hunched slightly, still expecting pain. A wave of something akin to shame, then a fierce protectiveness washed over him. He had brought her here. He had condemned her, and now he had claimed her. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. He knew he would face immense scrutiny. The council would demand answers. The pack would question his judgment, his sanity even. But his wolf knew, and his heart, now strangely light yet burdened, knew too. The fated mate bond was not something to be ignored, not something to be broken. It was the purest, most sacred law of their kind. It superseded all others, even the ancient laws of vengeance for a mate's death. As the ropes fell away from Alara's wrists, she rubbed them gently, the skin still tender. Her gaze remained fixed on Caleb, 1,000 questions swirling in her gray eyes. Her throat felt tight, a lump of fear and utter confusion lodged there. She tried to speak, to form a word, but no sound emerged. Her voice was a fragile thing, lost in the sudden, deafening silence of the square. The guards, under Caleb's watchful eye, began to guide Alara down the steps of the platform. Each step felt uncertain, her legs weak from the ordeal, her mind still in a fog. The crowd parted reluctantly, muttering amongst themselves, their outrage slowly giving way to a grudging, fearful obedience. They didn't understand, but they knew the Alpha's power, and they had just witnessed an undeniable display of it. The air was still thick with tension, but the immediate threat had receded. Alara felt the cool night air on her exposed neck, where moments ago the axe had hovered. She shivered, not from cold, but from the lingering phantom touch of death. As she reached the bottom of the platform, the guards steered her towards a side entrance of the Obsidian Keep, away from the main thoroughfare of the square. She glanced back one last time, an involuntary movement, her eyes seeking Caleb's. He was still standing on the platform, alone now, his powerful figure silhouetted against the fading light. His amber eyes, though distant, met hers across the remaining space. There was an intensity there, a depth of emotion she couldn't decipher. A storm of unspoken questions raged in her own gaze. What have you done? What does this mean? Why me? She felt a strange, unsettling pull, a connection that defied the circumstances, defying the rope marks on her wrists, defying the memory of the axe. It was a raw, primal recognition, even amidst her terror and disbelief. She saw his jaw tighten, a flash of determination in his eyes, perhaps a reflection of the tumultuous journey that now lay before them both. And then, the guards gently but firmly guided her through the archway into the dim interior of the keep, leaving Caleb standing alone in the silent, stunned square, the weight of his unprecedented decision heavy upon his shoulders. Alara's eyes slowly adjusted to the opulent dimness of the chamber, a stark contrast to the cold, stark cell she expected. The air, surprisingly warm, carried a faint, unfamiliar scent of aged wood and something subtly floral, not the damp earth of a dungeon. Soft furs lined a massive bed in one corner, beckoning with an unsettling promise of comfort she felt she did not deserve. Her wrists, no longer bound, still throbbed with phantom aches. She ran a tentative hand over them, the skin raw and chafed. Confusion swirled within her, thick and disorienting. One moment, the executioner's axe gleamed, the crowd bayed for blood, and then Caleb Thorne's roar had torn through the square, shattering her world into fragments she could not reassemble. She moved numbly toward a tall, arched window, its heavy velvet drapes drawn partially open. Outside, the obsidian walls of the keep rose, black and imposing against a bruised twilight sky. The chill of the stones seeped through the glass pane beneath her fingertips. She was alive, inexplicably, miraculously alive. But for how long? And why? The Alpha King's thunderous declaration, "She is my fated," echoed in her ears like a fever dream, impossible to grasp. It was a cruel jest, a twist of fate too bizarre to comprehend after enduring the shadow of death. Her stomach churned with a mixture of terror and a strange, hollow relief. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, trying to quiet the frantic drumming of her heart. The whispers of the crowd, the fear in the guards' eyes as they led her away, the fleeting, intense gaze of Caleb Thorne, it all blended into a terrifying tapestry of uncertainty. Her mind, usually so sharp, felt dull, bogged down by exhaustion and the sheer weight of her ordeal. She had faced death with a strange, fierce resolve, ready to accept her undeserved end. Now this reprieve felt more like a prolonged torture, a different kind of confinement. A shiver traced her spine, unrelated to the coolness of the glass. She was still accused of murder. The mark. The mysterious, intricate mark at the base of her neck. She had long known it was there. A faint birthmark, or so she had always believed. No one had ever spoken of it. Not Alaric, not her parents, not even the village healer. To think it held such power, such a sacred meaning, was beyond belief. Her fingers instinctively rose to touch the spot just beneath her hairline, but she stopped herself. It felt too intimate, too dangerous, a brand of something she could not yet understand. The chamber itself felt like a cage, albeit one gilded with dark, polished wood and rich tapestries depicting ancient hunts. A roaring fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting dancing shadows that made the unfamiliar shapes seem to writhe. She felt watched, even though she was alone. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the occasional pop of the fire and the ragged sound of her own breathing. Every muscle in her body ached, a testament to the strain of the day. Her throat felt parched, her tongue thick and heavy in her mouth. She wished for water, for answers, for anything to pierce the suffocating veil of her confusion. She moved from the window, her gaze sweeping across the room. There was a low wooden table with a half-eaten meal, long since cold. She felt no hunger, only a gnawing anxiety that twisted her insides. A small, intricately carved wooden chest sat on a dresser. Curiosity, a faint spark in her despair, pulled her towards it. She hesitated, then lifted the lid. Inside, folded neatly, were clean clothes, a simple tunic of soft linen and trousers, far more comfortable than her tattered dress. A small pitcher of fresh water and a silver goblet sat beside the chest. A wave of unexpected tenderness washed over her, then quickly receded, replaced by suspicion. This was not the treatment of a condemned killer. This was the treatment of a guest. A prisoner, certainly, but one afforded strange courtesies. Who was Caleb Thorne, this alpha king who had so brazenly defied his own laws, his own people? His eyes, she remembered, had been amber, sharp and intense, but not entirely devoid of something else, something she could not quite name. A flicker of something akin to desperation, perhaps, or a fierce protectiveness. The thought sent another tremor through her. A fated mate. The words were ancient, sacred, spoken only in hushed tones among the elders. It meant an undeniable bond, a soul-deep connection, gifted by the very stars. But how could she, a woman accused of murder, a woman broken by a cruel marriage, be fated to an alpha king? It made no sense. It was a curse, not a blessing. Her mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation, a way to dismiss the impossible truth. But the memory of the jolt that had passed between them, the primal roar that had escaped his lips, was too real to deny. A sudden, sharp click of the heavy door latch tore her from her thoughts. Her head snapped up, eyes wide and fixed on the imposing oak door. The subtle scent of damp earth and something distinctly walled, like pine and predator, wafted into the room before the door swung open. Caleb Thorne stood framed in the doorway, his tall, powerfully built frame filling the space. The darkness of his clothes seemed to absorb the light from the fire, making him appear even more imposing. His midnight hair was slightly disheveled, as if he had run a frustrated hand through it countless times. His face was indeed a mask of conflict, lines etched around his mouth, his brow furrowed deep. But it was his eyes that truly held her captive, piercing amber, now alight with a fierce, burning intensity, brimming with questions she knew she could not escape. He stepped inside and the door clicked shut behind him with a soft, final sound that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. His presence filled the spacious chamber, a palpable force that pressed against her, making her breath catch in her throat. He smelled of power, of the forest, of something primal and ancient. Her wolf, dormant and cowed for so long under Alaric's cruelty, stirred within her. A tiny, frightened whimper deep in her soul. It was an instinctual response, a recognition she had no control over, a biological imperative that both thrilled and terrified her. "Alara," he said, his voice a low rumble, deep and resonant. It was the same voice that had commanded the execution to halt, the same voice that had silenced a restless crowd. Now it was softer, yet held an undeniable edge of urgency, a demand woven into its very fabric. "We need to talk." She swallowed, her throat dry. She could not speak. The words seemed to stick, trapped behind a wall of fear and exhaustion. Her gaze darted between his eyes, searching for a sign, a hint of what was to come. Was this a reprieve, or merely a delay of the inevitable? Was he playing some cruel game, toying with her before delivering the final blow? Caleb took a slow step forward, then another, closing the distance between them. Each step was deliberate, measured like a predator approaching its prey. Yet there was a strange hesitation in his posture, a wariness she recognized as his own conflict. He stopped a few feet from her, his gaze unwavering, fixed on her face. She felt exposed, vulnerable under his scrutiny. Every tremor in her body, every flicker of emotion in her eyes, felt laid bare before him. "I do not understand," she finally managed to whisper, her voice thin and reedy, barely audible even to her own ears. It was all she could say, the truth of her profound confusion, the utter bewilderment she felt. Caleb's jaw tightened. He ran a hand over his chin, his gaze still locked on hers, as if trying to read the secrets etched upon her soul, to unravel the enigma she presented. "You were condemned to die, Alara Vance, accused of killing your mate." He paused, and the words hung heavy in the air, a reminder of the chasm between them, of the unforgiving law. "My pack demanded justice." He took another deep breath, his chest expanding, and she could almost feel the raw power contained within him, barely constrained. "Then I saw it." His voice dropped, becoming almost a murmur, but the intensity in his eyes did not waver. "The mark." His gaze flickered briefly, almost imperceptibly, towards the base of her neck. A blush, hot and unexpected, crept up her own neck and across her cheeks. The intimacy of his knowledge, the fact that he had touched her, had seen something so profoundly personal, made her feel utterly undone, exposed in a way she had not been in years. "It is the mark of a fated mate," he continued, his tone now a blend of authority and something akin to awe, of profound realization. "An ancient bond, sacred, undeniable." He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in, to resonate in the quiet room. "It binds us, Alara, you and me." She shook her head slowly, a single tear escaping the corner of her eye, tracing a cold path down her cheek. "No," she breathed, the denial automatic, born of years of pain and shattered expectations, of a life that had taught her to trust nothing. "It cannot be." His amber eyes narrowed slightly. "It is so, my wolf confirmed it. My instinct screamed it. The mark, it does not lie." He took another step, closing the space until he was almost within arm's reach. She could feel the heat radiating from him, smell the strong, wild scent of him more distinctly now. It was overwhelming, intoxicating, and frightening all at once. "How can I be your fated mate?" she asked, her voice cracking with the sheer absurdity of it all, with the weight of her own perceived unworthiness. "I am accused of murder. I am a broken woman. Your pack hates me." A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Pack law is clear," he stated, his voice regaining its authoritative edge, firm and unyielding. "A mate killer must pay the ultimate price. Yet, the fated bond, it supersedes all. It is a gift from the Mother Moon herself, a truth stronger than any accusation, any tradition." He looked away for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the luxurious room, as if gathering his thoughts, his internal struggle visible in the tension of his shoulders, the slight clenching of his hands. When his eyes met hers again, the desperation in them was undeniable, a raw plea for clarity. "I halted your execution, defying my own laws, risking the stability of my pack. Because of that mark," he stated, his voice rising slightly, the raw frustration evident, the magnitude of his actions laid bare. "Because of us. You must understand the magnitude of what I have done, Alara, the cost of this decision." He reached out a hand, then hesitated, clenching it into a fist before letting it fall to his side. His movements were guarded, careful not to startle her, but also a reflection of his own inner turmoil. "I need to know. I need the truth." His voice dropped again, filled with a plea that went beyond mere authority, a desperate need for understanding. "About Alaric, about that night. Tell me everything." His gaze was relentless, boring into her, demanding answers she was not ready to give. Answers that would unravel everything. The weight of her secret, the full, ugly truth of Alaric's cruelty and his final moments, pressed down on her. How could she explain it all to this powerful, proud Alpha King? How could she make him understand the years of suffering, the terror, the desperation that had led to that night? She had been prepared to die with her secrets, to let the world believe the lie. Now this unexpected reprieve, this impossible bond, forced her to confront it all, to relive the horror, the warmth of the fire, the soft furs, the rich tapestries, they all felt suffocating. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken words and unaddressed accusations. She could feel the tremors beginning deep within her, starting in her core and spreading outwards. Her knees felt weak, her head swam. A cold sweat broke out on her skin, despite the warmth of the room. I, she began, but the word caught in her throat, a dry, choked sound, utterly useless. Caleb watched her, his expression a complex mixture of expectation, frustration, and a flicker of something she dared not hope for understanding. His wolf, she sensed, was restless beneath his calm exterior, nudging him towards her, demanding clarity, demanding the truth of their shared fate. Tell me, Alara, he pressed, his voice softer now, almost coaxing, but still firm, still demanding the answers only she possessed. What truly happened? Was Alaric truly the man they painted him to be? Were you truly the murderer, as the pack believes? The questions pierced through her fragile composure, unraveling the last threads of her control, tearing down the protective walls she had built around her pain. Her vision blurred. The chamber, with its luxurious trappings and oppressive silence, seemed to tilt around her. The scent of pine and wolf, once overwhelming, now felt like an inescapable embrace, drawing her into a vortex of emotion. The intensity of his gaze was like a physical weight, pressing her down, 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 until she felt she could no longer stand. She tried to speak again, to form the words, to explain the tangled web of Alaric's abuse, his dark dealings, the constant fear she lived under. She wanted to tell him of the night she had found Alaric, already dying, how his last breath had been a curse, how she had been framed, utterly and completely, by unseen forces. But the words were stuck, trapped by the fear of disbelief, the fear of judgment, the fear of losing this impossible, terrifying chance at life, this glimmer of hope she barely dared to acknowledge. Her knees buckled. A whimper escaped her lips, unbidden. The exhaustion of months of terror, of the trial, of the walk to the gallows, of the sheer unimaginable shock of being pulled back from the brink, all coalesced into a crushing wave. She felt lightheaded, her body betraying her, giving out under the immense pressure. Caleb took a swift step forward, his hand reaching out, his amber eyes wide with sudden concern, a flash of alarm crossing his conflicted face. But he did not quite touch her. He stopped, perhaps remembering his own position, her vulnerability, the unspoken rules that still existed between them, the chasm of their past. The floor seemed to rush up to meet her. Her legs gave out completely, her world spun, a dizzying kaleidoscope of firelight, dark wood, and piercing amber eyes. The scent of Caleb filled her senses completely, a powerful, overwhelming presence. She felt herself falling, her body limp and unresponsive. The last thing she registered before everything went black was the luxurious resistance of the bed against her collapsing form. She had wanted to speak, to scream, to confess everything, but her body had given out. The secrets remained trapped, unspoken within her. The soft bed offered no comfort, only swallowed her, a dark pool after the storm. Alara lay there, breathless, the echo of Caleb's questions still vibrating through her very bones. Her mind was a whirlwind of memories, each one a shard of glass cutting at the edges of her resolve. Could she truly speak the words? Would they ever be believed? She felt the weight of years of silence pressing down, a heavy cloak she had worn far too long. Caleb watched her, a silent, imposing figure by the door. His amber eyes, once so piercing, now held a complex mixture of concern and unwavering expectation. He did not move, did not press, but his presence was a constant, undeniable force in the opulent chamber. The air, cool against Alara's skin, seemed to hum with unspoken urgency, carrying the faint scent of stone and a clean, wild smell that was uniquely his. She could feel the lingering tremor in her hands, a residual fear that had become a constant companion. Slowly, Alara pushed herself up, her movements stiff and reluctant. The plush velvet of the bed felt strangely alien beneath her fingertips. She avoided his gaze, focusing instead on a point just beyond his shoulder, where a sliver of moonlight fought its way through the heavy draperies. The silence stretched, becoming a living thing between them, filled with the ghosts of her past. She had forgotten how to share, how to simply be. A dry, bitter taste coated her tongue like ashes. She swallowed hard, the movement a painful rasp in her throat. Her voice, when it finally came, was a mere whisper, thin and fragile, as if the slightest breath would shatter it. He, he was not the man they thought. Caleb's jaw tightened, a muscle flexing under his skin. He remained still, a statue carved from granite, but his attention was absolute, every fiber of his being tuned to her. The flicker of the torchlight from the hallway outside danced across his sharp features, casting shadows that deepened the intensity in his eyes. He waited, his silence an invitation, a challenge. Alaric, Alara continued, the name a venomous sting on her lips. Her gaze finally lifted, meeting his for a fleeting instant, a desperate plea for understanding, hidden within their depths. He was kind once, or I thought he was, but the kindness, it was a mask, carefully worn. She felt a fresh wave of tears welling, hot and painful. They traced paths down her dust-streaked cheeks, mingling with the residue of those shed earlier. The taste of salt was sharp on her lips. It was difficult to speak, to expose the raw wounds she had hidden for so long. Every word was a struggle against the shame, the fear of judgment that still clung to her like a shroud. He controlled everything, she breathed, her voice gaining a fractional strength, fueled by a simmering resentment. My clothes, my thoughts, even in the books I read. He saw shadows where there were none, suspected intentions that never existed. She closed her eyes for a moment, picturing the narrow confines of her life, the invisible bars of Alaric's jealousy. Caleb's expression softened, almost imperceptibly, his stance relaxing slightly. He took a single, measured step closer, a silent acknowledgement of her pain. His wolf, usually a roaring presence, was quiet now, listening with an ancient patience. He could feel the tremor in her voice, the raw honesty of her confession. He would leave me alone for days, Alara continued, her words tumbling out faster now, each one chipping away at the dam she had built around her memories. Locked in my rooms, sometimes without food, just to teach me a lesson, to remind me who held the power. Her fingers locked around the silken edge of the bedspread, twisting the fabric, a small, desperate act of defiance. A deep frown etched itself between Caleb's brows. The initial anger he had felt toward her, the judgment instilled by pack law, began to dissipate, replaced by a growing chill of disgust directed at the deceased lord. He had known Alaric as ambitious, perhaps arrogant, but never had he imagined such petty, calculated cruelty. He would speak to me in whispers. Alara's voice dropped again, almost to an inaudible murmur, telling me I was worthless, that no one else would ever want me, that I was lucky to have him, that I was unlovable. The words, though spoken softly, carried the crushing weight of every time they had been uttered, every instance they had chipped away at her spirit. She could still feel the phantom chill of his breath on her ear, the coldness of his words. Caleb's fists clenched, his knuckles turning white. He remembered Alaric's public facade, the charming lord, the loyal pack member. The contrast with Alara's tortured account was jarring, sickening. A cold fury began to simmer within him, a protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed for this woman, for any woman. He felt the slow, steady beat of his wolf's heart, resonating with a deep, ancient anger. The fear, Alara whispered, a shudder running through her slender frame. It was constant, like a shadow always at my heels, waiting to pounce. I learned to anticipate his moods, to silence my own thoughts, to become invisible. Her gray eyes, wide and haunted, searched his, seeking an understanding he might not be able to give. She was not just speaking. She was reliving every moment, the air thick with the residue of her terror. He made sure I had no friends, no confidants, she went on, the dam finally breaking. Anyone who showed me even a passing kindness would find themselves facing his wrath, their lives made difficult. I was completely alone, completely isolated. The memory of her utter solitude was a sharp pang in her chest, a loneliness so profound it still hurt to breathe. Caleb's jaw worked, his gaze fixed on her. He had seen the way Alaric's servants had averted their eyes, the nervous fidgeting of his personal guards. He had dismissed it as the usual fear of a powerful lord. Now he understood. It was not just respect they felt for Alaric, but a deeper, more pervasive dread. His anger, previously a distant rumble, now surged within him, hot and consuming. He often spoke of power, Alara continued, her voice taking on a different timbre now, a note of something beyond personal pain. Not just within the pack, but other kinds of power. Things he said would make him invincible, beyond even the Alpha's reach. Her eyes darted away, a flicker of something new, something more dangerous than her own suffering, crossing her face. Caleb noticed the subtle shift. His wolf instincts, honed by years of leadership and a constant awareness of threats to his pack, sharpened. This was no longer just about a cruel husband. This was about something else entirely. "What kind of power?" he asked, his voice low, a deep rumble that sent a shiver through the quiet room. Alara hesitated, her gaze dropping to her clasped hands. Her fingers were still tightly interwoven, as if holding herself together. The silence returned, heavy with the weight of unspoken secrets. She could feel the cold dread creeping up her spine once more, a primal fear that had nothing to do with Alaric's physical abuse, but with the darkness he had dabbled in. "He met with strange men," she finally managed, her voice barely audible. "Always in secret, always late at night. Their faces were unfamiliar, their scents wrong, not like us." Her brow furrowed, a faint scent of something metallic, something ancient and cold rising in her memory. Caleb's golden eyes narrowed, piercing the dimness. "Who were they?" he pressed, his tone firm, demanding, yet still laced with a surprising gentleness. He knew the intricacies of pack politics, the alliances and rivalries. Strangers, unfamiliar scents. This was a serious breach of protocol, a dangerous game Alaric had been playing. "I never saw their faces clearly," Alara whispered, shaking her head. "He kept me confined, away from his studies, away from his dealings. But I heard whispers of old packs, of forgotten relics, things that could change the very balance of our world." Her words were fragmented like pieces of a broken mosaic, yet they painted a chilling picture. He took another step closer, his tall frame looming over her, but without menace. He could feel the tremor in the air around her, a palpable fear that was more than just memories of cruelty. "Relics?" he echoed, the word a foreign taste on his tongue. The pack had strict laws against dabbling in ancient, forbidden artifacts, a lesson learned through generations of bitter experience. Alara's breath hitched, a small, ragged sound in the quiet room. Her eyes, still pleading, conveyed a depth of terror that went beyond her own personal suffering. She wanted to tell him, to unburden herself completely, but the words felt trapped in her throat, held captive by a fear that was both visceral and deeply ingrained. She thought of the warnings Alaric had snarled at her, the threats of what would happen if she ever dared to speak of his true ambitions. The chilling certainty that her life, and perhaps even the lives of others, would be forfeit. The knowledge was a poisoned chalice, burning her from the inside out. A single tear escaped, tracing a hot path down her cheek. She knew the danger of what she held, the true gravity of Alaric's last days. It was not just his personal cruelty, but something far more insidious, something that still threatened them all. The urge to speak warred with the primal instinct for self-preservation. Alara choked back a sob, the sound raw and broken, unable to reveal the full, dangerous truth of Alaric's last days, her eyes pleading for understanding. The door clicked shut behind Caleb, leaving Alara in the unsettling luxury of her temporary prison. He stood in the silent corridor of the Obsidian Keep, the stone cold against his back, but a fire raged within his chest. Her tears, her fragmented words, the raw pain in her gray eyes, all swirled in his mind. She spoke of abuse, of a life lived in fear. Yet the full truth of Alaric's end remained unspoken, a heavy secret she clutched tight. His alpha instincts demanded answers, clear and definitive, but his wolf now yearned for her safety, for her peace. The faded mate mark pulsed beneath his own skin, an undeniable thrum that defied logic and law. His jaw tightened. He could not leave her alone with such a burden. He could not, in good conscience, condemn her when his very soul screamed of their connection. But tradition, The ancient laws of his pack hung like an axe over both their heads. To defy them without irrefutable proof, without understanding the full scope of Alaric's treachery, would shatter the very foundation of his rule. The pack would see him as weak, as swayed by a woman accused of murder, a woman who brought chaos to their rigid order. He saw the doubt already brewing in the eyes of his council, the whispers among the warriors. He needed guidance, a clarity that his own conflicted heart could not provide. There was only one person in the entire territory who possessed the wisdom he now desperately sought, Elder Lyra. Her chambers were deep within the keep's oldest wing, a place where time seemed to slow, where the ancient ways still held sway. Caleb strode through the torch-lit halls, his boots echoing on the polished stone, each step a testament to the urgency gripping him. The air grew cooler, heavier as he descended into the lower levels, the scent of damp earth and unseen roots replacing the faint smell of wolf fur that usually permeated the keep. He felt the weight of his alpha lineage pressing down on him, generations of leaders who had upheld these very laws he now considered breaking. He reached a heavy, unadorned wooden door. No guard stood watch here, for Lyra needed no protection. Her presence alone commanded respect, her wisdom a shield more formidable than any blade. He raised his hand, hesitating for a moment, gathering his turbulent thoughts. This was not a plea for sympathy, but a seeking of ancient truth. He knocked, a measured rap that resonated in the quiet corridor. A soft voice, like rustling autumn leaves, bade him enter. Lyra's chamber was a sanctuary of soft light and earthy smells. Dried herbs hung from the low ceiling, their muted aromas mingling with the scent of burning cedar and something else, something ancient and indefinable. Shelves crammed with leather-bound texts, some so old their spines crumbled, lined the walls. A small, crackling fire in a stone hearth cast flickering shadows that danced across the room. Lyra sat cross-legged on a woven mat before the fire, her back ramrod straight despite her advanced years. Her silver hair, coiled in an intricate braid, reflected the firelight like spun moonlight. Her blue eyes, though ancient, were sharp and perceptive, missing nothing. She did not turn immediately, simply gestured to a cushion opposite her. Caleb sank onto it, feeling the tension drain from his shoulders in her presence. The air in the room felt thick with unspoken knowledge, with histories stretching back further than even the keep itself. He watched the flames, struggling to find the words to articulate the seismic shift that had occurred within him, within his very world, just hours before. The enormity of it felt almost impossible to convey. "You carry a heavy burden, my alpha," Lyra said, her voice soft but clear, finally turning her gaze to him. Her eyes held no judgment, only a deep, knowing understanding. The burden of a choice that challenges the very foundations of our ways. Caleb met her gaze, his amber eyes reflecting the firelight. "Elder, I have seen something that no alpha has seen in generations. Something that defies every law I swore to uphold." He paused, the words catching in his throat. Even now, the confession felt like a betrayal of his duty, a fracturing of the very order he maintained. "The woman, Alara Vance, she bears the mark." Lyra's expression remained serene, but a subtle shift, a deepening of the lines around her eyes, revealed a flicker of profound recognition. "The fated mate mark," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. "It has been many centuries since our kind has witnessed such a sacred sign." She watched him, waiting. Caleb found himself speaking with a rare vulnerability, pouring out the events of the execution square. He described the moment his fingers brushed Alara's neck, the jolt that had ripped through him, the primal roar of his wolf. He spoke of the intricate swirl of the mark, hidden beneath her hair, a pattern that mirrored one he had unknowingly borne for years, concealed on his own inner wrist. He had never understood its meaning, had dismissed it as a birthmark, a curious design. Now its purpose was terrifyingly clear. "My wolf," he said, his voice raw. It recognized her instantly. It claimed her. Every fiber of my being screamed that she is mine, that she is my destiny. He clenched his fists, the conflict evident in the tremor of his voice. "But she stands accused of murdering her mate. Our laws are absolute on this." Lyra nodded slowly, her gaze thoughtful. Indeed, Alpha, the laws are absolute. A mate killer must pay the ultimate price, for such an act tears at the very fabric of our bond, our pack, our nature. It is a poison that must be purged. She paused, allowing his words and her own to settle into the quiet room. Yet, the fated mate bond, Alpha, is older than any law inscribed by the hands of our ancestors. It is a law of the universe itself, woven into the very essence of our species. She reached for a small, intricately carved wooden box beside her. Opening it, she revealed a collection of polished river stones, each etched with ancient symbols. She selected one, smooth and dark, and turned it over in her palm. For generations, we have sought to control our destiny, to guide our children, to strengthen our pack through arranged unions. But the fated mate bond, when it appears, renders all such efforts moot. It is the purest, most powerful connection our kind can know. Lyra's blue eyes fixed on Caleb, holding his gaze. It means your spirits, your very wolves, were forged from the same cosmic fire. Your paths were destined to intertwine before you ever drew your first breath. It is a bond of unimaginable strength, of perfect balance, of a profound understanding that transcends words and even thought. Caleb listened, a strange mix of awe and terror washing over him. This was not mere tradition. This was sacred history. He had always yearned for his mate, had felt the hollow ache in his soul, but he had believed his alpha duties precluded such a personal destiny. To find her now in such a circumstance was a cruel twist of fate. "What does it mean for the pack?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The weight of his pack, his people, was always foremost in his mind. "It means," Lyra began, her voice gaining a quiet power, "that your Luna, the heart of your pack, has been chosen not by circumstance or convenience, but by the ancient spirits themselves. She is meant to stand beside you, to complement your strength, to guide your people with a wisdom unique to your shared connection. She would complete you, Alpha, in a way no other ever could." She closed her eyes for a moment, as if seeing visions of the past. A pack led by fated mates is said to flourish beyond all others, to achieve a harmony and strength that becomes legendary. A strange, unfamiliar warmth spread through Caleb's chest, a feeling that resonated with the incessant thrum of his wolf. To have a mate, a fated mate, was a dream he had long suppressed, but the circumstances of their meeting, the dark cloud of accusation that hung over Alara, made the dream a terrifying nightmare. "But the law," Caleb insisted, his gaze falling to his hands. "The law states she must die. The pack saw her crime. They will not accept this." He spoke of Alara's fragmented confession, the abusive nature of Alaric, the hint of a deeper, darker secret. He mentioned her inability to speak the full truth, her fear. Lyra's eyes, though still serene, held a newfound gravity. "Our laws, Alpha, are built on the principles of justice and truth. They are designed to protect our pack, to ensure order. But if the truth itself is hidden, if the justice is flawed, then the law becomes a weapon of injustice." She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "To defy a fated mate bond is to defy the very spirits that grant us our power, our connection to the ancient world. It risks imbalance, internal strife, and a fracturing of your own soul, Alpha." Caleb felt a chill run down his spine, a sense of profound unease settling deep within him. The thought of fighting against the very essence of his being, of rejecting his fated mate, was a torment he could not bear to imagine. Yet the cries of the pack for justice, for adherence to tradition, were equally loud within his mind. He was trapped as between cosmic destiny and mortal law. "You must understand, Alpha," Lyra continued, her voice firm, "that overturning such a fundamental law, especially one concerning a mate killer, cannot be done lightly. It cannot be done on a whim or simply because of a sacred mark, however profound. The pack must see the truth. They must understand why this deviation from tradition is necessary. Without absolute, undeniable proof of her innocence, your authority will be questioned. Your people will be divided, and the peace of the Obsidian Keep will shatter." Caleb's gaze darkened. He knew the potential for dissent. He had already seen the fear in some faces, the anger in others, when he had halted the execution. To protect Alara now, without truly knowing the depth of Alaric's treachery, felt like walking a razor's edge. The honor of his pack, the very stability of their society, rested upon his shoulders. "You must investigate, Alpha," Lyra advised, her voice a low, steady current. "Not merely for Alara's sake, but for the sake of your pack, for the sacred bond you have discovered, and for the integrity of your rule. Alaric Blackwood was a man of darkness, and darkness leaves many shadows." She closed her eyes once more, a faint sigh escaping her lips. Alara's fear, her inability to speak the whole truth, speaks volumes. It suggests a truth far more complex, far more dangerous than simple marital strife. Caleb felt a surge of grim determination. He had known deep down that this was the path he must take. Lyra's words solidified it, giving voice to the instinct that had warred with his sense of duty. He could not, would not, allow his fated mate to be wrongly condemned. He would uncover the truth, whatever it took, whatever dark secrets it unearthed. The image of Alara's tear-streaked face, her defiant but broken spirit, fueled his resolve. He would fight for her, for them. "What should I look for, Elder?" he asked, his voice now steady, imbued with the clarity of purpose. "Where do I begin?" Lyra opened her eyes, her gaze piercing, as if seeing beyond the present moment into the unfolding future. "You begin where the lies are thickest, Alpha. You begin by questioning everything you thought you knew about Alaric Blackwood. Men of his ilk weave tangled webs, and their deceptions often outlive them." She lifted her gnarled hand, placing it gently on Caleb's forearm. The warmth of her touch, ancient and strong, flowed into him. Her eyes, grave and unwavering, held his. "The truth, Alpha, often hides in the shadows of what we think we know, not in plain sight." The weight of Elder Lyra's words pressed down on Caleb Thorne like the very stones of his ancient keep. He paced his study, the thick wolf fur rug softening the sound of his boots, but doing nothing to quiet the storm in his mind. "The truth, Alpha, often hides in the shadows of what we think we know, not in plain sight." Her voice, rich with ages of wisdom, echoed the frantic beat of his own wolf. It had been days since the near execution, days since Alara had been confined, days since the shocking revelation of their bond. Each passing hour felt like a betrayal of the woman he now knew was his, a woman whose eyes held a pain he was only beginning to understand. His fingers often drifted to the spot on his wrist where his own fated mate mark lay hidden, a swirling design mirroring the one on Alara's neck. The mark thrummed with an unfamiliar warmth, a constant reminder of the life he almost allowed to be extinguished. Guilt, sharp and cold, twisted in his gut. He had been ready to end her life based on the flimsy evidence of a world that judged without truly seeing. Now he needed to see. He needed to peel back the layers of deception and fear that had suffocated Alara and clouded the truth of Alaric's death. This was not merely about justice for his pack. It was about protecting his mate, about understanding the sorrow that still lingered in her gaze. Caleb began his discreet inquiry in the most unlikely of places, the barracks. He called his guards in one by one, not for formal questioning, but for routine reports, letting the conversation drift naturally. He watched their face, their hands, the subtle shifts in their eyes. The air in the small, stone-walled room was always cool, smelling of damp earth and stale sweat. He noticed the way their shoulders tensed at the mention of Lord Alaric Blackwood's name. A young guard, Thomas, usually boisterous and open, grew stiff, his gaze fixing on a point just beyond Caleb's left shoulder. "Lord Alaric kept to himself mostly," Thomas mumbled, his voice tight. "Didn't mingle much with the lower ranks." Caleb's amber eyes narrowed. "And when he did, what did you observe?" Thomas swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. He shifted his weight, the leather of his armor creaking softly. "He was particular. Demanded quiet, always seemed to be heading out late or coming back just before dawn." The guard's gaze darted to Caleb's, a quick flash of fear. "Nothing important, Alpha, just his habits." The tremor in Thomas's voice told a different story. Caleb felt the subtle shiver of his wolf, sensing the unspoken. He dismissed Thomas with a nod, but the seed of suspicion had been planted. He repeated this pattern with several other guards, each offering a similar guarded account. They spoke of Alaric's isolation, his late-night activities, and a general air of unease that surrounded him. No one spoke ill of the dead directly, but their reluctance, their averted eyes, painted a clear picture. The air in the keep began to feel heavy with unspoken secrets. Next, Caleb turned to the household staff. They were the eyes and ears of the keep, unseen observers of every private moment. He summoned the head housekeeper, Martha, a woman with kind, weary eyes and hands perpetually stained with flour and polish. He chose a quiet corner of the main kitchen, the scent of roasting meat and simmering herbs filling the space. Martha nervously twisted the corner of her apron, her gaze fixed on the worn flagstones beneath her feet. "Martha," Caleb said, his voice softer than usual, "I need you to speak truthfully about Lord Alaric. Anything you might have seen, heard." She flinched, her eyes widening slightly before dropping again. "Lord Alaric was a powerful man, Alpha," she began, her voice a low murmur. "It's not my place to speak of such things." "It is your place to speak the truth to your Alpha," Caleb corrected gently, but with an underlying steel that Martha understood. "Alara Vance's life hangs in the balance. If you know anything that might shed light on this matter, you must tell me." Martha took a deep, shaky breath. The faint smell of fear, subtle but distinct, reached Caleb's senses. He was often agitated. The lady, Alara, she kept to her rooms mostly. We barely saw her, but him— Martha paused, glancing around as if unseen ears might be listening. He had visitors, not always through the main gates, sometimes late, after all was quiet. Caleb leaned forward slightly. "Visitors? Who?" "Never saw their faces clearly, Alpha. Hooded figures mostly. And he received letters too. Many letters, some with strange seals, not from our packlands." She wrung her hands. "He would burn them quickly after reading, sometimes in the hearth of his study, sometimes even in the kitchen oven, startling us with the smoke." Her voice trembled. "He was a man of many secrets, Alpha, always behind a locked door." The image of Alara's tear-stained face, the memory of her whispered terror, surged through Caleb. Alaric, burning letters, strange hooded visitors. The pieces were disparate, yet they began to form a disturbing pattern in his mind. He thanked Martha, his thoughts already racing. The air in the kitchen, once comforting with the smell of food, now felt thick with suspicion. He could almost taste the fear that Alaric had instilled in these people, a fear that lingered even after his death. He spent the next few days in a relentless cycle of interviews. He spoke to stable hands who noticed Alaric's horse being prepared at odd hours. He questioned scribes who occasionally received requests for ciphered parchments for Alaric, always with strict instructions for secrecy. Each conversation, each hesitant word, each averted glance, chipped away at the simple narrative of a wife murdering her cruel husband. The cruelty was undeniable, Alara's suffering clear, but the murder itself felt increasingly murky. Caleb's conviction in the initial verdict began to waver, then crumble entirely. His wolf paced restlessly inside him, howling at the injustice. Alaric was not merely a cruel husband. He was a man entangled in a web of clandestine dealings. The whispers grew louder, clearer. Alaric's nighttime activities, his hidden correspondences with unknown parties outside the keep, his paranoia about eavesdroppers. It all pointed to something far more sinister than a domestic dispute gone tragically wrong. Caleb remembered Alara's broken words, a darker, dangerous secret. She had hinted at it, even as fear choked her voice. He had dismissed it then, blinded by duty and rigid pack law. He would not make that mistake again. He could feel Alara's presence in the keep, a constant thrum beneath his skin, a yearning that warred with his Alpha's need for logic and order. He needed to clear her name, not just for her, but for the sacred bond that now tied them. The thought of her still confined, still bearing the weight of unspoken accusations, ignited a fierce protectiveness within him. He felt his heart beat a heavy rhythm against his ribs, a mixture of determination and a profound longing to erase her pain. He needed answers, not just to prove her innocence, but to understand the depths of Alaric's deceit. The most logical place to look for answers now was Alaric's private study, a room Martha had described as being always locked. Caleb had secured it after Alaric's death, but had done little more than a cursory search, assuming it would hold nothing relevant to a domestic murder. How foolish he had been, bound by preconceived notions. He walked through the silent corridors toward the study, the torchlight casting long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. The air here was colder, heavier, seemingly untouched by life since Alaric's demise. He pushed open the heavy oak door. A thick layer of dust covered every surface, disturbed only by the vague outlines of objects that had been removed by the initial search party. The scent of old paper, stale incense, and something faintly metallic hung in the air. Caleb's eyes scanned the room methodically. A large, ornate desk dominated the center, its surface clear. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with ancient texts and ledgers, all appearing undisturbed. The fireplace was cold, a few charred logs resting in its grate. Caleb began his search, not in a frenzy, but with the quiet, focused intensity of a predator tracking its prey. He ran his hands along the spines of books, feeling for anything loose, any hidden catch. He tapped the wooden panels of the desk, listening for hollow sounds. He moved to the walls, examining the tapestries, feeling the cold stone beneath. His fingers grazed the rough, uneven surface of a section of the wall behind a tall, dark bookshelf. He pressed against it, then again, harder. A faint, almost imperceptible click broke the silence of the room. His breath hitched. He felt his pulse quicken, a drum against his ear. His wolf surged forward, alert, expectant. He pulled at the stone, pushing his fingers into the narrow gap. With a grunt of effort, the stone grated outwards, revealing a small, dark recess in the wall. Inside, nestled deep within the dusty cavity, lay a single, leather-bound journal. Its cover was plain, unadorned, but the weight of it in Caleb's hand felt significant, heavy with secrets. The faint, earthy smell of aged leather filled his nostrils. He pulled it out, his fingers brushing away the fine layer of dust, his heart pounding with a strange mix of dread and triumph. He knew instinctively that this was the key. He knew this journal held the true story, its pages filled with cryptic entries hinting at treachery. The heavy leather of the journal felt cold in Caleb's hands, a stark contrast to the burning conviction in his gut. Its pages, filled with a twisted script only Alaric could have conceived, whispered of shadows and deceit. He needed to show Alara this, to see if her guarded eyes held any answers. He walked through the echoing corridors of the obsidian keep, the silence amplifying the thrum of his own pulse. Each step brought him closer to her chambers, to the woman who was both his destiny and the center of a deepening mystery. The guard outside Alara's door straightened, eyes flicking to the journal, but Caleb merely nodded, pushing open the heavy oak. Alara sat by the narrow window, her slender frame silhouetted against the weak afternoon light. The air in the room felt thick with unspoken history, a heavy cloak she wore even in solitude. She flinched as the door opened, her head snapping up, those striking gray eyes immediately locking onto his. A flicker of fear, then resignation crossed her face. She still expected judgment, perhaps a renewed accusation. Caleb felt a pang, a strange ache for the trust that should have been theirs from the moment their marks awakened. He carried the weight of her past pain and his own ignorance, like a physical burden. "Alara," he began, his voice softer than he intended, the deep resonance carrying a hint of his inner turmoil. He held up the journal. "I found this in Alaric's study. It is coded, but I have managed to decipher some entries." He watched her closely, searching for any reaction, any sign that the object in his hand stirred a memory or a dread within her. The faint scent of her, subtle and earthy, reached him even across the small distance, a gentle anchor in his turbulent thoughts. Her gaze fixed on the leather-bound book, a shadow passing over her features. She did not speak, but her fingers locked around the cup on the table beside her, knuckles white. He knew if she let go, she would likely spill it, her composure fragile beneath the surface. He saw the tremble in her hand, the slight dip of her chin, the way her breath hitched. The very sight of the journal brought back a torrent of memories for her, a fresh wave of the suffocating fear she had endured. He could almost taste the bitterness of her past, the cold steel of Alaric's cruelty that had haunted her days and nights. He took a step closer, then another, until he stood before her. The space between them crackled with an unacknowledged current, a tension born of their fated bond and the lingering specter of her wrongful condemnation. These entries, Caleb continued, his voice low and deliberate, they speak of illicit dealings, of clandestine meetings in something called the Serpent's Eye. He paused, allowing the unfamiliar name to hang in the air, testing its resonance. They are not the scribblings of a man involved in petty trade. This is something far more dangerous. Alara finally lowered her cup, placing it with exaggerated care on the table. Her eyes, usually pools of sorrow, now held a glint of something sharp, something akin to recognition, perhaps even terror. The Serpent's Eye, she repeated, her voice a fragile whisper, barely audible above the quiet hum of the keep. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if warding off a dark vision, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness, he realized, but one of profound exhaustion, of a burden too heavy to bear alone for too long. He longed to reach out, to wipe it away, but held back, respecting the fragile boundary between them. "Tell me what you know, Alara," Caleb urged, his tone gentle, coaxing. He wanted to shatter the walls she had built around herself and to peel back the layers of pain and fear. This journal suggests Alaric was not merely a cruel husband. It hints at a deeper betrayal, a conspiracy within the pack. Your silence, however justified it felt then, now only serves to obscure the truth. He gestured to the journal. This could be our path to clearing your name, to understanding why Alaric truly died. He knew she needed to see his genuine desire for truth, not just his authority. He needed her to understand that he believed her, even if her story was still incomplete. Her gaze met his, and he saw the conflict raging within her. The instinct to protect herself, to remain silent, battled with the desperate need for justice, for freedom from the shadow of Alaric's death. He saw the slight trembling of her lower lip, the way her chest rose and fell with quick, shallow breaths. The air itself seemed to grow heavy with the weight of her choice, the decision to trust or to remain forever cloaked in her sorrow. He shifted his weight, his own wolf stirring within him, urging him to reassure her, to promise her protection, no matter the cost. He was obsessive, Alara began, her voice still thin, but gaining a fraction of strength. Not just with me, but with power. He believed he was destined for more than just a lordship. He spoke of ancient bloodlines, of forgotten artifacts that could bend the pack to his will. Her eyes drifted to the journal in his hand, a raw mixture of revulsion and fearful fascination. The scent of old paper and leather, now so close, seemed to trigger a more vivid memory for her. Caleb's jaw tightened. This was far worse than he had imagined. Alaric's ambition had curdled into something monstrous, something that threatened the very fabric of their society. He mentioned names, places. Caleb pressed softly, his gaze unwavering, trying to project strength and reassurance without pushing too hard. He knew how fragile her trust was, a delicate thread they were just beginning to weave. He needed to provide a safe space for her words to finally bloom, even if those words were painful. Alara nodded slowly, her gaze still fixed on the journal. There was a specific entry, I saw it once, when he left the book open by accident. He wrote of a midnight pact in a meeting. He was so careful, so secretive, but he was always agitated after those nights. Her voice dropped to a barely audible whisper, a secret shared between only them. It was usually with Silas Croft. The name hit Caleb with the force of a physical blow. Silas Croft, a seemingly unassuming pack member, known for his quiet demeanor and his meticulous record-keeping. The thought of Silas being involved in Alaric's sinister schemes sent a shiver down Caleb's spine. It was a stark reminder that treachery could wear any face. Caleb felt a surge of cold anger, a deep, unsettling suspicion that had been lurking in the shadows of his mind now burst into the light. "Silas Croft," Caleb repeated, his voice laced with a dangerous edge. He felt his wolf stir, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. "What did they discuss, Alara? Where did they meet?" The urgency in his voice was palpable, a desperate need to unravel the threads of this conspiracy before it could tighten around them all. His heart pounded against his ribs, not with fear, but with a fierce determination to uncover the truth, to avenge the wrongs done, and to protect his fated mate. Alara's gaze was distant now, lost in the labyrinth of her memories. The abandoned mill, she breathed, her eyes unfocused, looking beyond him to a scene only she could see. Always the abandoned mill, just outside the western gate. They thought no one would ever go there. Alaric had a key, a hidden entrance. He would always return late, smelling of damp earth and something acrid, metallic. She shuddered, a full-body tremor that spoke volumes of her past terror. The smell of the decaying wood, the rustle of rats, the hushed, conspiratorial tones, they were all replaying in her mind. Caleb felt a cold knot of dread form in his stomach. The abandoned mill was a place everyone avoided, a place where dark things could easily fester unseen. He looked down at the journal in his hand, then back at Alara, a profound sense of gratitude washing over him. She had trusted him. She had given him the first real lead, a tangible path to the truth he desperately sought. He realized then that the bond between them was not just one of destiny, but one forged in the crucible of shared adversity. He offered her the journal, a silent invitation for her to see the evidence with her own eyes, to confront the monster she had lived with through his own written words. Here, he said, his voice husky, see for yourself. His own hand, his own twisted ambitions laid bare. He held it out, not demanding, but offering it as a symbol of their burgeoning alliance, their shared quest. He felt the soft brushing of her fingertips as she reached for it, a touch that sent a jolt, a spark of undeniable connection through his very being. Their hands lingered for a fraction of a second, skin against skin, and in that fleeting moment, the air thickened, pulling taut around them. Caleb felt the heat of her touch, a sudden, searing warmth that spread through his arm, igniting a primal awareness deep within him. It was more than just a physical sensation. It was an echo of their fated bond, a whisper of the profound intimacy that awaited them, if they could only survive this darkness. Alara's breath hitched, her eyes widening slightly, as if she too felt the unexpected electricity, the silent promise of something profound. A wave of vulnerability washed over her, and she quickly averted her gaze, her cheeks coloring. She took the journal, her fingers tracing the rough leather cover. Her eyes scanned the cryptic symbols, a new wave of realization washing over her. She saw the familiar patterns of Alaric's obsession, the twisted logic that had governed his every action. The words, though coded, seemed to scream at her from the page, confirming her deepest fears and the horror she had endured. A fresh wave of despair threatened to consume her, but then she looked up at Caleb, his amber eyes filled with a steady, unwavering resolve. It was his strength, his quiet support, that anchored her in that moment. He was planning something, Alara whispered, her voice barely audible, raw with emotion. She clutched the journal to her chest, as if it were a shield against the memories it conjured. He was always so secretive, especially about the meetings in the mill. He never let me near that place. A shiver ran down her spine, recalling Alaric's possessive glares whenever she showed even a passing curiosity. The cold, damp air of that forsaken place seemed to seep into the very walls of her memory. Caleb's gaze was fixed on her, his mind already racing, piecing together the fragmented clues. The abandoned mill, Silas Croft, the Serpent's Eye. It all began to form a chilling picture of calculated betrayal. He could almost hear the rustle of Alaric's robes, the furtive whispers, the clink of illicit objects in the dark. He knew then that the truth lay buried beneath layers of deceit, and Alara was the only one who held the key to unlocking it. He had to be patient, to be gentle, to earn her full trust. "What else, Alara?" he asked, his voice low, encouraging. "Every detail matters. Every memory, however small, could be the piece we need." He watched her, seeing the turmoil in her eyes, the struggle to articulate the unspeakable. She was reliving her torment, but she was doing it for justice, for truth, and for them both. He felt a surge of fierce pride, a deep admiration for her resilience in the face of such overwhelming pain. She took a deep, shuddering breath, her fingers still gripping the journal. Her eyes, filled with a renewed sense of purpose, met his. It was a shared burden now, a common fight. And in that moment, the fragile bridge between them solidified, forming a bond stronger than any pack law. The scent of ancient parchment mingled with the faint, sweet scent of her skin, creating a strange, intoxicating blend that filled his senses. Alara whispered a name, her voice barely audible. Silas? He was with Alaric that night, in the abandoned mill, discussing some dangerous relic. The name, whispered like a secret curse, hung in the air between them. Silas. Caleb's mind seized upon it, a single sharp shard of truth cutting through the lingering uncertainty. He looked at Alara, her face still pale, her eyes wide with the memory of that night, and the last vestige of doubt vanished. His wolf surged, a silent, primal roar of protective fury. He had wronged her, judged her, and now he would rectify it. He left Alara in her chamber, a silent promise in his amber gaze to return, to bring her justice. The keep felt too confining for the storm raging within him. He strode through the moonlit corridors, his boots making soft, determined thuds on the cold stone. The air carried the faint scent of old fires and damp earth, but all Caleb could smell was the bitter tang of betrayal. Each step towards the exit of the obsidian keep was fueled by a growing fury, cold and precise. He knew the abandoned mill Alara spoke of, a forgotten structure on the fringes of the Whispering Woods, seldom visited. It was the perfect place for illicit meetings and dark secrets. The night wind whipped around him as he pushed through the heavy iron gates. The scent of pine and damp leaves filled his lungs, sharp and invigorating. His wolf was restless beneath his skin, eager for the hunt, for retribution. He ran, transforming not into his full wolf form, but embracing the speed and agility of his inner beast. The trees blurred past him, their ancient branches reaching like gnarled fingers towards the sliver of moon. The forest floor, normally soft with fallen needles, felt hard and unyielding beneath his powerful strides. He heard the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, the distant hoot of an owl, but his focus remained singular, unwavering. He was a force of nature, an alpha driven by a profound need for truth and a fierce instinct to protect his fated mate. The abandoned mill appeared as a dark, hulking silhouette against the faint moonlight. Its wooden frame sagged, and the roof had long since given way in places, leaving gaping holes open to the skummeiste. A chill wind whistled through the broken window panes, carrying with it the smell of decay and forgotten things. Caleb slowed his approach, his senses now fully attuned. He caught a faint human scent within the mill, a nervous, almost sour smell he recognized. Silas. He pushed open the creaking wooden door, sending a plume of dust dancing in the faint light. The air inside was heavy and stagnant, thick with the smell of old wood, damp stone, and fear. His boots crunched on scattered debris and loose planks. The mill machinery, rusting and broken, loomed in the shadows like skeletal giants. A lone, flickering lantern cast long, dancing shadows, revealing Silas Croft hunched over a workbench, meticulously polishing a small, ornate dagger. The clatter of the door startled Silas, who dropped the dagger with a yelp, sending it skittering across the floor. Silas's head snapped up, his eyes wide and bloodshot, reflecting the flickering lantern light. His face, usually composed, was a mask of pure terror. He stammered, scrambling backwards, almost tripping over his own feet. Alpha King, Caleb, what brings you here at this late hour?" His voice was thin, reedy, laced with a tremor he could not hide. Caleb stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame, his amber eyes piercing through the gloom, fixed on Silas. He did not speak, allowing his presence alone to exert its crushing weight. Silas swallowed hard, his gaze flickering around the room as if searching for an escape that did not exist. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, punctuated only by Silas's ragged breathing and the wind moaning through the mill's broken panes. Caleb stepped further into the room, his movements deliberate, predatory. The very air around him seemed to thicken with his suppressed power. "Alara told me your name, Silas," Caleb said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that echoed in the cavernous space. "She told me you were here with Alaric the night he died." Silas flinched as if struck. His face drained of all color, turning a sickly gray. He began to babble, his words tumbling over each other in a desperate attempt to explain. To Denime. "No, Alpha, that is a misunderstanding. I was merely passing by." Caleb took another step, and another. The space between them shrank, and Silas instinctively pressed himself against the workbench, his hands trembling violently. "Do not lie to me, Silas," Caleb warned, his voice gaining an edge that made Silas whimper. "My patience is thin. The truth, and nothing less, will suffice." The force of Caleb's command seemed to shatter Silas's already fragile composure. Tears welled in Silas's eyes, streaming down his pale cheeks. He slid down the workbench, collapsing onto the dusty floor, burying his face in his hands. "He made me, Alpha. Alaric made me," he choked out, his voice muffled by his hands. "He threatened my family, my children. He said he would ensure they vanished into the woods if I did not help him." Caleb remained impassive, his expression unreadable, but his wolf stirred within him, a silent observer of the unfolding drama. He crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to Silas's level, his eyes still burning with an intense, unwavering light. "Help him with what, Silas?" he pressed, his voice low but firm, brooking no evasion. "What was Alaric doing here, and what was your part in it?" Silas lifted his head, his face a mess of snot and tears. "He wanted your throne, Alpha," he confessed, the words rushing out now, a torrent of long-held secrets. "He planned to usurp your power. He said you were weak, that you cared too much for the old ways, for tradition. He wanted a new order, one where he held the true power, not you." A jolt ran through Caleb. Usurpation, treason. The very word sent a cold shock through his veins, quickly followed by a surge of righteous anger. Alaric, a respected lord of the pack, planning such a betrayal. It explained so much: the hidden journal, the cryptic entries, the undercurrent of unease among the pack members when Alaric's name was mentioned. "And how did he plan to achieve this?" Caleb asked, his voice now dangerously quiet, laced with a chilling calm. Silas shuddered, glancing nervously around the shadowed mill. "Through forbidden magic, Alpha," he whispered, his eyes wide with a superstitious dread. He had found an ancient artifact, a relic of dark power, hidden deep within the old crypts beneath the mountains. He believed it would grant him control over the pack, over even the Alpha's will. He spoke of it as if the words themselves carried a curse. Caleb felt a prickle of unease. Forbidden artifacts were not mere myths. Their power was real and terrifying. "He intended to use it during the next full moon ceremony," Silas continued, gathering a desperate momentum, seemingly relieved to finally unburden himself. "He needed me to distract the guards, to ensure his access to the inner sanctum. He promised me wealth, power, a place at his side in his new order. But I did not want it, Alpha. I swear I did not." Silas wrung his hands, his gaze pleading. "I only agreed because of my family. I have no ambition beyond keeping them safe." Caleb listened, his mind piecing together the fragments, the puzzle of Alaric's true nature finally forming a horrifying picture. He had been a viper in their midst, poisoning the pack from within. "And the night he died?" Caleb prompted, his eyes boring into Silas. "Tell me exactly what happened here." Silas took a deep, shuddering breath. Alaric had retrieved the artifact that night. He was ecstatic, almost mad with power. He showed it to me, claimed he was testing its influence. Silas's voice dropped, his eyes darting to a dark corner of the mill. He was so consumed by it, so desperate to control it, that he grew careless. We argued. I tried to warn him of the dangers, of the ancient warnings about such items, but he would not listen. He laughed at my fears. Silas then described a frantic struggle, a clash of wills between himself and the increasingly unhinged Alaric. He was holding the artifact, Alpha, and its power was radiating from him, making his eyes glow red. He was trying to bend it to his will, but it fought back. It was too powerful even for him. Silas's voice cracked. I tried to wrestle it from him, to prevent him from unleashing its full, terrible force, but he fought back, his strength enhanced by the relic. We fell. He hit his head on that old grinding wheel. Silas pointed a trembling finger towards a massive, rusted stone wheel, its surface stained a dark, almost black color. Caleb looked at the wheel, then back at Silas. The image of the scene played out in his mind. Two men, one consumed by a dark, dangerous power, the other desperate to prevent a catastrophe, locked in a struggle that ended in accidental death. It was a tragic, messy end for a man who deserved little sympathy, but an accidental death nonetheless. Alara was innocent. The realization hit Caleb with a fresh wave of anger, a burning resentment for the injustice she had suffered. "And Alara?" Caleb asked, his voice sharp, cutting through Silas's explanation. "Why was she accused? Why was she framed?" Silas cringed. "It was a desperate measure, Alpha. When Alaric fell, I panicked. I knew if the truth came out, if anyone discovered Alaric's plans for treason and the artifact, my own involvement would be revealed. My family would be outcast. Perhaps even worse." He wrung his hands, his gaze pleading. Alara was always distant. Alaric had made her so. She often kept to herself, rarely spoke. No one would question her guilt. She was the perfect scapegoat, Alpha. Everyone knew Alaric was cruel to her. It made the story of a vengeful wife plausible. No one would look deeper. He went on, his words laced with self-loathing. "I manipulated the evidence, Alpha. I planted Alaric's dagger near her chambers, knowing it would be found. I whispered rumors to certain guards, knowing they would spread. It was easy. Too easy. The pack already disliked Alara because Alaric had isolated her. They were ready to believe the worst." He looked up at Caleb, tears streaming freely down his face once more. "I am so sorry, Alpha. I swear I never meant for her to be harmed. I only wanted to protect my own. Please have mercy on my family." Caleb rose to his full height, his gaze unwavering, taking in every detail of Silas's pathetic confession. The man was a coward, yes, but he was also a victim of Alaric's manipulation and his own fear. Yet his actions had almost cost an innocent woman her life. Caleb's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his nails digging into his palms. The sheer callousness of the frame, the casual destruction of Alara's reputation and impending execution filled him with a cold, simmering rage. He had almost been an accomplice to such a grave injustice. "You speak of an artifact, Silas," Caleb said, his voice now devoid of any emotion, a flat statement that chilled Silas to the bone. "Where is it now? What did Alaric die trying to control?" Silas visibly recoiled, his eyes darting frantically towards a section of the mill wall where loose stones were piled haphazardly. He had not wanted to reveal that. His gaze was fixed on Caleb, a mixture of terror and resignation etched onto his face. The words were a struggle to form, as if speaking them might unleash the very chaos he feared. The silence stretched once more, punctuated by the faint creak of the old timbers. Finally, Silas, broken and terrified, pointed to a secret compartment in the mill, revealing the very artifact Alaric died trying to control, a relic of dark magic that could plunge the pack into chaos. Anticipation thickened the air in the Obsidian Keep's grand hall, all eyes from young to old fixed on Alpha Caleb Thorne standing by the immense stone hearth. Flames cast shadows across his stern face, revealing his firm jaw. Hushed whispers filled the vast space, a nervous hum through the assembled pack. They remembered the execution square, the sudden halt, the Alpha's declaration. Questions now waited for answers. Caleb's gaze swept his people. A silence fell as he began to speak. His voice, usually a command, held a somber note. He spoke of duty, justice, and the sacred trust of an Alpha. He spoke of lessons learned, how even the strongest could be misled. Then his eyes narrowed, shifting to a small, trembling figure near the dais edge. Silas Croft, pale and shaking, was brought forward by two silent guards. His eyes darted around the hall, avoiding the piercing stares. He looked broken. A collective gasp rippled through the hall, recognizing the pack elder. Known for trade, Caleb let the murmurs build, then cut them with a sharp silence. The hall instantly quieted, only faint rustles remaining. Caleb revealed the truth of Alaric's treachery, piece by painstaking piece. He spoke of Lord Alaric Blackwood's true nature, not the noble maid Alara was accused of murdering, but a man consumed by ambition. Caleb presented the coded journal, its entries deciphered, laying bare Alaric's illicit dealings. He detailed how Alaric undermined his authority, forging alliances with dangerous outsiders for forbidden power. He sought artifacts, Caleb boomed, items of dark magic capable of tearing our pack apart. Whispers returned, louder, filled with anger. Silas flinched, his head bowing low. Caleb recounted Silas's confession, how he was drawn into Alaric's schemes, and how Alaric's greed for a relic led to his accidental demise during their struggle in the abandoned mill. The pack listened, their faces a mixture of horror and understanding. Alara stood beside Caleb, silent and dignified. Relief washed through her. The truth was free. The accusation, the whispers, the death sentence, all lifted. She watched the pack's shock turn to understanding, then to anger for Alaric, not her. A single tear traced her cheek, a tear of release, sorrow and quiet relief. Caleb turned, his amber eyes softening as they met Alara's. He took her hand, warm and firm. And Alara Vance, he declared, his voice certain, was an innocent victim, framed to conceal Alaric's treachery. A sigh swept the hall. Some averted their gaze, shame for their judgment. Others met her eyes, offering silent apology. He held Alara's hand aloft. Then slowly he reached behind her neck. He pushed aside her dark brown hair, revealing the intricate, swirling mark just beneath her hairline. It pulsed faintly, subtly luminous. A deep hush fell over the hall. This mark, Caleb announced, his voice reverent, is the proof of our destiny. He bared his forearm, showing a matching, intricate design on his inner wrist, a mirror image of Alara's. Gasps erupted, louder, filled with wonder. The fated mate mark. Legend spoke of such a rare, sacred bond. She is my fated mate, Caleb proclaimed, his gaze locking with Alara's, a raw emotion shining in his amber eyes. And she is your Luna. Alara's breath hitched. Luna. The word felt foreign, yet deeply right. She looked at Caleb, seeing the man who had saved her, who bore the other half of her mark. A fierce warmth grew in her chest, chasing despair. Her fingers tightened around his, accepting the responsibility and love. The pack, stunned, began to stir. Murmurs and whispers grew into acceptance. The elders, solemn but approving, nodded slowly. Younger pack members who witnessed the execution square drama now understood. Their alpha, driven by instinct, had secured their future. A lone voice, clear and strong, broke the murmurs. All hail Luna Alara! It was a young warrior, his face alight. The cry was quickly taken up, echoing through the grand hall, growing into a thunderous chorus. All hail Luna Alara! All hail Alpha Caleb! The sound overwhelmed a wave of loyalty and faith. Alara's knees trembled, not from fear. It was the weight of it all, the sudden shift from death's shadow to belonging's light. She had lived in isolation and fear. Now acceptance enveloped her, a future she never dared to dream. Caleb squeezed her hand, a small, reassuring gesture. He was her anchor. He addressed Silas, his voice hard. Silas Croft will be stripped of his rank and titles. He will serve the pack for his betrayals, but will not face ultimate punishment. His confession saved others, offering reprieve. Silas collapsed onto the floor, sobbing openly. Caleb's gaze returned to his pack, resolute. We faced darkness, but emerged stronger. Let this be a lesson. Truth will prevail. Our pack's future rests on honor, loyalty, and sacred bonds. He lifted Alara's hand again, intertwining their fingers more tightly. Their joined hand, the two faded marks, promised a new beginning. Alara looked up at Caleb, her gray eyes shimmering with joyful tears. His amber gaze met hers, a silent conversation between them. Recognition, understanding, and a nascent love promised to deepen. The painful past faded. The future, uncertain but bright, stretched before them. As the cheers subsided, a quiet warmth settled over the hall. It seeped into Alara's bones, banishing the cold she had carried. She felt Caleb's strength beside her, his unwavering presence. Their intertwined hands, a visible bond, promised a future of love, trust, and shared strength.